I have washed pots in the citadel of Karreth for 51 years, and for 51 years I believed the great door at the end of the hall was only a wall with a memory of being a door. You must understand what the quiet door was to us. It stood at the far end of the hall of Karreth, which itself was the oldest room any living person had walked in. The ceiling there had broken long before my grandmother drew breath, so that a shaft of gray daylight fell straight down the middle of the hall and pooled on the worn floor, and the dust that hung in that light never seemed to settle, as if the air in that room had forgotten how to be still. At the end of all that emptiness stood the door. It was taller than 9 men and wider than a granary, and it was made of something that was not stone and was not metal, a dark-grained surface like the heartwood of a tree that had grown for 10,000 years and then been cut and polished by hands that loved it. Across its face ran lines, thin as a hair and deep as a knife mark, in a pattern no scholar of any empire had ever read. They had tried. Every empire that ever held Karreth had tried. I was a scullery girl when I first saw it. The head cook took us new ones down the hall on our first morning, the way you might take children to see a great river, so they would learn its size and learn to respect it. She told us the rule, and the rule was the only thing every master of Karreth had ever agreed upon, across all the changes of flag and tongue and crown. Do not lean on the door. Do not chip at it. Do not pray to it, and do not curse it. Walk past it as you would walk past an old soldier sleeping, and let it sleep. We did not know then that the rule was a lie of comfort, that the men who made the rule knew the door was not sleeping but waiting, and that the waiting frightened them more than they would say. Karreth had been taken and lost and taken again more times than the chronicles could hold. It sat on the only high ground for 100 leagues, where 3 roads met and a deep cold river bent, and whoever held Karreth held the throat of the country. So it was always being held by someone. In my own life I had cooked for 4 different masters under 4 different banners, and each one came in certain he would be the last, and each one left in a wagon or a grave. The Osri were the masters when this happened. The Osri Dominion, who had come down out of the eastern, passes 19 years before with their long horns of war and their engines that walked, and who had broken the old garrison in a single autumn and hung the old governor from the river bridge. They were not cruel beyond the cruelty of all conquerors. They taxed and they pressed men into their armies, and they took the strong sons and the clever daughters away east and did not send them back, and they let the rest of us live small lives in the shadow of their walls, which is the most that the conquered may hope for. I cooked for them as I had cooked for the others. A pot does not care whose mouth the soup goes into. That is a thing you learn in a kitchen, and it is not entirely a comfortable thing to know. But the Osri were different from the others in one matter, and the matter was the door. The empires before them had obeyed the old rule. They had set a guard at the mouth of the hall and let the quiet door sleep, because they were afraid of it in the simple animal way that men are afraid of a thing too large and too old to understand. The Osri were not afraid. Or rather, they were afraid, and their fear made them angry, and their anger made them want to break the thing that frightened them. From the first season of their rule they had wanted the door open. They believed there was something behind it. Every empire believed that in its heart, but the Osri believed it loudly, and they had the engines to act on the belief. So in 19 years I had watched them try to open the quiet door more times than I could number, and I had watched the door refuse them every time, and I had stopped thinking of it as a thing that could ever do anything else. The girl came to my kitchen in the 11th year of the Osri, Leora. She was perhaps 9 when she was brought in, a thin child with river mud still on her ankles, one of the orphans the soldiers swept up out of the burned villages downriver and handed to the citadel to be made into useful hands. I was given charge of her because I was old even then, and they thought an old woman and a small girl would suit, and they were right, though not for the reasons they thought. I did not love her at once. I want to be honest about that, because what came after was so large that there is a temptation to pretend I always knew, that I felt some weight in her from the first. I did not. She was a hungry, quiet child who flinched when a pot banged and who could not yet reach the high shelf, and I taught her to scrub and to peel and to keep her thumbs out of the fire, and that was all. Love came the way it usually comes in a kitchen, slowly, through 10,000 small mornings, through the way she learned to leave the heel of the bread for me, because she had noticed that my old teeth liked the soft middle, through the way she would hum without knowing she was humming when her hands were busy. That humming, I should tell you about that now, because it matters more than I understood, and a teller who knows the end should be honest about where the threads were laid. Leora hummed an old tune when she worked. It had no words that she knew. She told me once, when she was perhaps 13, and we were both elbow-deep in the autumn slaughter, that she did not know where she had learned it. She thought maybe her mother had sung it in the village, before the village was a thing that no longer existed. It was a plain melody, rising and falling, the kind of thing a person sings to keep time with their hands, and I had heard 100 kitchen women hum 100 such tunes in my life and thought nothing of it. But Leora's tune was the same tune every time, note for note, and she sang it most when she was doing the thing she always did, the thing I will come to, and looking back I think the tune and the thing she did were two halves of one inheritance, passed down a line of women who no longer remembered they were passing anything at all. The thing she did was this. Whatever Leora cooked, she set aside the first portion before anyone was served, not for herself. She would take the first ladle of the soup, the first cut of the roast, the first round loaf out of the oven, and she would set it on a clean board by the window and leave it there, untouched, until the meal was done. Then, only then, she would eat or give it away. When she was small, I scolded her for it, because in a kitchen that feeds a garrison you do not waste, and a portion set aside is a portion the steward will mark missing. But she could not explain it and she could not stop it, the way some people cannot stop touching wood or counting steps, and after a while I let her be, and I lied to the steward and said the missing portion was scrapings for the dogs. The first share she called it when she called it anything. She did not know why. She only knew that it would be wrong, deeply and bodily wrong, to let the first of any food be eaten before the first share was set apart. I thought it was a child's strange grief, a habit grown out of the hunger she had known before she came to us, a way of telling herself there would always be enough. I was wrong about that too. I was wrong about nearly everything that mattered, which is, I have come to believe, the proper condition of a witness. We do not understand the thing we see. We only swear that we saw it. Now I must tell you about the last forcing, because everything turned on it, and because I want you to understand that the door did not open for the ossuary, though they brought against it the whole strength of an empire. And then it opened for a kitchen girl with flour on her wrists, and that the difference between those two things is the whole of what I have to say. The ossuary governor of Karreth in those years was a man called Vasir Oseth, who was younger than his office and hungrier than his rank, and who had been told, I learned later, that he would rule Karreth until he died unless he could give the dominion the thing behind the door. So the door was his life's work, the way a mountain is a climber's life's work, and he hated it the way only a man can hate the thing he has staked his life on. He had tried fire and found the door did not burn. He had tried the great rams and found the door did not so much as ring. He had brought scholars from the East who read the hairline script aloud in 17 reconstructed tongues, and the door had not stirred, and 3 of the scholars had gone mad in the trying, which the soldiers said was the door's doing, and which I think was only the ordinary madness of clever men who fail at the one thing they were brought to do. And in the autumn of the 19th year, Vasir Oseth brought up from the river barges the thing the Dominion called a breaker, which was an engine the size of a house, all black iron and slow fire, that walked on legs like a thing in a bad dream, and which had brought down the walls of 7 cities in the east. He meant it to bring down the quiet door. They cleared the hall for it. They cleared the kitchens too that day, which had never happened in my 50 years, and that is how I came to be standing in the hall to see what I saw, because they herded all the citadel's servants to the edges of the great room to watch, so that we would carry the story out, and the story would be a story of ossuary power. Leora stood beside me. She was 19 by then, grown into a tall, quiet woman with her mother's tune still in her throat, and she had been baking when the soldiers came, and she still had the flour on her, and in her hands, because they had not let her set it down, she carried the day's first loaf, round and dark and warm, the first share she had not yet had the chance to set apart. I remember that. I remember thinking, even with the great engine grinding into the hall on its terrible legs, even with the governor up on his platform in his war horns and the soldiers in their ranks, I remember thinking only, the girl is still holding the bread. She has not been able to set down the first share, and it troubled me out of all proportion, the way a small wrongness will trouble you when you are too frightened to feel the large one. The breaker took its place before the quiet door, and Vasher Oseth gave a speech that I will not repeat because it was the speech all conquerors give, and then he gave the order, and the engine struck. I have heard thunder close. I have heard the river ice break in spring, which is a sound like the bones of the world cracking. I had never heard anything like the breaker striking the quiet door. It was not a crash. A crash is a thing that ends. This was a long tearing roar that went on, iron against that dark grained surface, and the floor jumped under my feet, and old women fell, and dust came down out of the broken ceiling in sheets, and the shaft of gray daylight was swallowed in it, so that for a moment we could see nothing at all, only hear the roar and feel the floor leap, and taste the stone dust thick on our tongues. And then the engine struck a second time, and a third, and the governor was screaming for more, and the soldiers were screaming too, the way men scream to keep their courage up, and I had my arms around Leora and Leora had her arms around the loaf, and we were both shaking, and I thought, this is the day it breaks, this is the day they win, and I did not know yet whether to be glad or afraid. The breaker struck the quiet door 11 times. I counted, the way you count in terror, to have something to hold. On the 11th blow there was a sound I cannot describe except to say it was the sound of something giving way, and I felt my heart fall, and the dust began to clear, and Vasher Oseth stood up on his platform with his arms raised in triumph. It was the breaker that had given way, not the door. The great black engine, the thing that had broken 7 cities, stood before the quiet door with its iron face caved in and its slow fire guttering, and one of its terrible legs folded under it like the leg of a horse that has been ridden to death. And the quiet door stood behind it without a mark, without a scratch, the hairline script across its face exactly as it had been for 10,000 years. And the gray daylight came down again through the broken ceiling and lit the dust and the ruined engine and the silent governor, and I understood, the way you understand a thing in your body before your mind will say it, that the quiet door could not be opened. Not by them. Not by anyone who came at it the way they came. The door was not a lock waiting for a strong enough key. The door was a judgment, and the Osri had been judged, and so had every empire before them, and the judgment was always the same, and the judgment was no. Vasher Oseth did not take it well. He had the engineers flogged, and he had the scholars who had survived put in the cells, and he stood a long time before the ruined breaker with his back to all of us. And then he went away, and the soldiers began the slow work of clearing the dead engine out of the hall, and the rest of us were sent back to our kitchens to feed the army its supper as if nothing had happened, because an army must eat whether or not its emperor's pride has been broken. And that is another thing you learn in a kitchen. That the world does not stop for grief, only the kitchen keeps it from stopping. I have told the forcing slowly because I want you to feel its size. Now I will tell what came after slowly too, but for a different reason, because what came after was small, and small things, when they are the right small things, are heavier than any engine. It was past midnight when Leora went back to the hall. I did not see her go at first. The supper had been cooked and served and the great pots scrubbed, and the kitchen was finally dark and quiet, the banked fires breathing in the hearths, and I had lain down on my pallet in the warm corner the way I had lain down 10,000 nights, and I was nearly asleep when I felt the wrongness of an empty bed across the room where Leora slept. And I got up, old bones complaining, and I went to look for her. The way you look for a child even when the child is a grown woman. Because the heart does not update its records. I found her in the hall. The hall was empty of soldiers now. They had dragged the ruined breaker most of the way to the great doors and left it for the morning, a dead black shape in the moonlight, for the moon had come up while we worked and its light came down now through the broken ceiling where the gray day had been. And there, at the far end, small against the size of everything, stood Leora, and she was carrying the loaf. The same loaf, the first share she had baked that morning and never been able to set apart, gone cold now, and she was walking down the long hall toward the quiet door with the cold loaf held in both hands, and she was humming. I could hear it even from the kitchen mouth, the old plain tune rising and falling in the great stone silence, and the hair stood up on my arms, and I did not call out to her. I do not know why I did not call out. I think some part of me, the oldest part, the part that is not afraid of the right things and is afraid of the wrong ones, understood that I was watching something that must not be interrupted, the way you do not wake a person who is walking in their sleep toward the edge of a thing. I followed her. I kept to the wall in the shadow, the way servants keep to walls, and I followed her down the long hall, and the moonlight came down in the middle and she walked through it and out of it and through it again, and she came at last to the foot of the quiet door, where no servant was ever meant to stand, where the rule said do not lean and do not chip and do not pray and do not curse, and she stopped. And she did the thing she always did. She set aside the first chair. She knelt my Leora, my scullery girl grown tall, and she set the cold dark loaf down on the floor at the foot of the quiet door, the way she had set the first chair on the board by the window every day of her life since she was a child, and she straightened the loaf with both hands so that it sat true, the way she always straightened it, and she said something I could not hear, low, the way you might say grace, the way you might say I am sorry there is not more, the way you might say here, this is the first of it. This is yours. And then she put her hand flat against the dark grained surface of the door. Not to lean on it, not to push. She did not push. She laid her palm against the door the way you lay your palm against the flank of a horse you mean to gentle, the way you lay your hand on a sleeper's shoulder to wake them kindly, and she stopped humming, and she said one more thing, and this time I heard it because the hall had gone so very still, stiller than I had ever known it, the dust hanging in the moonlight and not moving at all, and what she said was, "It's all right. You can rest now. I brought you the first of it." And the quiet door, which had refused fire and ram and engine, an empire for 10,000 years, which had broken the breaker of 7 cities not 3 hours before, which had judged every conqueror who ever came against it and found them all wanting, woke up. I have spent the rest of my life trying to describe what I saw, and I have failed every time, and I will fail now. But I will try once more because you deserve the truth, and the truth is all I have to give. The light came first. It came up out of the hairline script, all of it at once, the 10,000 thin deep lines across the whole great face of the door, and it was not white, and it was not gold, but something warmer than gold and older than fire, the color of late light on a wheat field, the color of the inside of a loaf when you break it open, and it ran along the lines the way water runs along the cracks in dry ground, finding its old paths, filling them. And the script that no scholar of any empire had ever read began, as the light filled it, to make sense. I cannot read. I never could. But as the warm light filled those lines I understood them, not with my eyes but with some older organ, the way Leora had always understood her tune and her first share without knowing why. And what the line said was not words exactly, but a long-held breath of recognition, a thing like a name being remembered, a thing like a door that has waited so long it had forgotten it was a door finally being allowed to open. And it opened. It did not crash open. It did not swing. The two great halves of the quiet door drew back from each other slowly, with a sound like a long sigh let out after a held breath, the sound a person makes when they have been bracing against something for so long that they have forgotten they were bracing, and they finally set it down. And from behind the door came the light, the warm wheatfield light, but more of it, an ocean of it, pouring out into the dark hall and rolling up the walls and filling the broken ceiling. And the moonlight in the middle of the hall was swallowed by it. And the dead black engine of the ossuary was lit up gold. And I was lit up gold, pressed against the wall with my old hands over my mouth. And Leora, kneeling at the foot of the door with her hands still raised where the door had been, Leora was lit most of all. And then the door spoke. I do not know how to tell you that a door spoke, except to say that it did, that the voice came from everywhere and nowhere, from the light and the lines and the stone. A voice without a throat, deep and patient and unspeakably tired and unspeakably glad. A voice like the citadel itself, clearing the dust of an age out of its chest to say one thing. And the one thing it said, in the old understanding that filled me without passing through my ears. The one thing the quiet door of Karreth said after 10,000 years of silence and refusal was this: heir of the first hands. That was all. 3 words and a name that was not Leora's name and was her truest name. The door said it the way you would say a thing you had given up hope of ever saying. The door said it the way an old servant says the name of the master's child come home at last, with relief and with grief, and with a love that has outlasted everyone who remembered why it began. Heir of the first hands. And the light rolled out and the dust hung gold in the air and did not move, and Leora knelt at the threshold with her face turned up into the light, and she was weeping, though her face was calm, the tears just running down, the way water runs down a window, and I understood then, all at once, the whole of it, the way you understand the shape of a country when you finally climb high enough to see it. The first hands were us. I do not mean the ossuary, and I do not mean the empires before them, and I do not mean the scholars who could not read the lines. I mean us, the small people, the kitchen people, the ones who were always already here when each empire came and were still here when each empire left, the ones who cooked the soup whoever's mouth it went into, the ones who set aside the first share without knowing why, the ones who hummed the old tunes that had no words. The quiet door had been built, the understanding told me, filling me by the first hands, in an age so far back that the river had run in a different bed, and the first hands had built it and a great many other things, works that outlasted the people who made them. And then the first hands had been scattered, the way people are always scattered, by war and famine and the slow grinding of time, and they had forgotten what they were. They had become scullery girls and pot washers and village children with mud on their ankles, but the line had not ended. Lines do not end as easily as empires think. The line had run down through 10,000 years of small forgotten lives, mother to daughter, hand to hand, carrying without knowing it the old tune and the old custom and the old blood, and the door had waited, because the first hands in their wisdom had built the door to open for only one thing. Not for strength. The ossuary had brought strength and the door had broken their strength. Not for cleverness. The scholars had brought cleverness and the door had broken their minds. Not for fire or ram or engine or empire or any of the things that the great and the proud believe will open the doors of the world. The first hands had built the quiet door to open for kindness and for blood and for the two of them together. It would open for an heir of the line, but only an heir who came to it the right way, who came not to take but to give, who came carrying the first share and offered it freely and laid a gentle hand on the old wood and said, "Rest now, I brought you the first of it." Strength could not fake that. Cleverness could not counterfeit it. You either were the kind of person who set aside the first share without knowing why, the kind of person who said it's all right to a frightened thing, or you were not, and no army on earth could make you into one. The door had spent 10,000 years refusing everyone who came to take, and then a kitchen girl came to give, and the door knew its own. That is the thing I have carried for the rest of my life, the thing I most want you to understand. The first hands could have built a door that opened for the strong. They did not. They built a door that opened for the kind, and they trusted that kindness would survive in their line longer than memory, longer than glory, longer than any of the great works themselves, hidden down in the kitchens and the villages where the empires never thought to look for it. And they were right. They were right by 10,000 years. The kindness survived. It survived in a tune with no words and a loaf set aside, and a girl who could not bear to let the first of anything be eaten before the first share was set apart. The empires kept the high ground in the chronicles and the war horns, and they lost everything, every one of them in their turn. The first hands kept nothing but a habit of giving, and they kept it across an age, and in the end the door of the world opened for them, and not for the conquerors. And I think if you understand only one thing from an old woman who washed pots for 51 years, let it be that one. The proud build doors that open for the proud, and then weep when the doors will not open for them. The wise build doors that open for the good and trust the good to last, and the good do last. That is the secret the Osri broke their engine trying to learn, and never learned, and we knew it all along in our kitchens and did not know that we knew. What lay behind the door I will not tell you, partly because I do not have the words and partly because it is not mine to tell. It was Leora's, it was the heir's, and some inheritances are not for witnesses to spend. I will tell you only that it was vast, and that it was patient, and that it had been waiting as long as the door had, and that when the light had settled and the dust had at last come down out of the air, Leora rose from her knees and stepped across the threshold, and she did not look back, and the loaf, the first share, stayed where she had set it, on the floor at the foot of the open door, and that loaf is still there. I have seen it many times since. It has not gone hard, and it has not gone to mold, and the dogs will not touch it, and the mice go around it. It sits where she set it, warm to the touch though no fire is near it, the first share given freely and received at last, and the citadel folk leave it be, the way we once left the door be, only now we leave it be out of love and not out of fear, which is a better reason to leave a thing alone. Osri are gone. I should tell you that, for those who want to know how the empire fell, though the falling was not the point and never is. Vashir Osith came down to the hall at dawn and found the quiet door open and the light pouring out and the air gone behind it, and he went in after her with his soldiers. The way a conqueror goes after a thing he believes is his by right of wanting it, and what happened to him behind the door I do not know. But he did not come out, and his soldiers came out changed, quiet. And they laid down their war horns, and many of them did not go home east, but stayed and took up small lives in the valley below the citadel. And within a year the Dominion's hand had loosened on Karreth the way a dead man's hand loosens on a sword. And within 3 years there were no Osri here at all. And the high ground and the 3 roads and the bend of the cold river belonged again to the people who had always cooked the soup, and who cook it still. Empires do not fall the way the chronicles say, all at once, in a battle. They fall the way a thing falls when the reason for it is gone. The Osri had come for the door, and the door had judged them, and the judgment was no. And after that there was no reason for them. And so they ended the way all of them end, the way the next ones will end too if next ones come, while the kitchens go on. Leora comes back sometimes. Not often, and not for long, and not entirely as she was. She is the heir now of the first hands, of the line and the door and the great patient thing behind it. And that is a large thing to be, and it has made her large in a way that is hard to sit beside, the way it is hard to sit beside the river in flood when you knew it as a stream. But she is still Leora. I know this because of how I know it, which is the only way that ever mattered between us. The first time she came back, after the door, she came in the night the way she had gone, and I woke to the wrongness of a presence in the dark kitchen, and I got up, old bones, older now, and there she was by the hearth, tall and lit faintly gold even in the dark. And I did not know what to say to a woman the door of the world had named, and I stood there like a fool with my mouth working. And she smiled, my Leora, the same crooked smile she had at 13 over the autumn slaughter, and she reached out and she broke the heel off the day's loaf that sat cooling on the board, the soft-middled loaf, and she did not eat the heel. She held it out to me, because she had remembered. Across everything she had become, across the door and the light and the name, she had remembered that my old teeth liked the soft middle and the hard heel was mine, and she gave me the heel, and I took it, and we did not say anything, and that was when I wept, not at the door, not at the light, not at the name, but there in the dark kitchen over a heel of bread, because the heir of the first hands had come back across 10,000 years of inheritance to remember an old woman's teeth. And if you want to know what kindness is, what the door was built to open for, what survived when all the empires died, it is that. It is that exactly. It is the heel of the bread given to the one whose teeth are old. I am very old now myself, older than the head cook who first walked me down the hall. I do not wash the pots anymore. The young ones do that, and I sit by the fire and tell them to keep their thumbs out of it, and they do not always listen, and that is right. That is how it should be. Sometimes one of them hums while she works, a plain tune, rising and falling, no words, and I do not always know if it is the tune, Leora's tune, the first hand's tune, or only one of the 1,000 kitchen tunes that have always been hummed in this place. I do not ask. It is not for me to know which child carries the line. The first hands did not tell their own daughters, and they were wiser than I am. The line carries itself, in the giving, in the first share set aside, in the gentle hand and the rest now, and it does not need an old woman pointing at it and might be harmed by it. So I let them hum. And sometimes, when a girl sets the first portion aside on the board by the window without knowing why, I see the steward frown at the missing share, and I tell him it is scrapings for the dogs, and I lie to him the way I lied for Leora, and I keep the old custom safe under the cover of a small kindly lie, which is, I have come to think, about the most a witness can do. We do not understand the thing we see. We only keep it safe and pass it on and set aside the first of it. The quiet door stands open still, at the end of the hall of Karreth, and the light comes out of it soft and gold, and the loaf sits warm at its foot, and the broken ceiling lets the day down into all of it, and the citadel folk walk past it the way the rule once told us to, only gently now, only kindly, and the dust hangs in the light and does not settle, as if the air still cannot quite believe what it has finally been allowed to see. I walk down there most mornings, while my legs still carry me. I stand a little way off, where a servant should stand, and I look at the open door and the warm loaf and the gold light, and I think of a hungry, quiet child with river mud on her ankles who could not reach the high shelf, and I think, I knew you when. I did not know what you were. None of us did. The first hands built it so that none of us would. But I knew you when, and I taught you to keep your thumbs out of the fire, and you grew up and gave the first share to the oldest door in the world, and it opened for you and named you what you were, and then you came back and gave me the heel of the bread. And of all the things I have seen in 51 years in this kitchen, of all the empires risen and broken, of all the engines and the war horns and the light pouring out of a door that had been silent since before the river found its bed, that is the one I will carry out with me when I go. The heel of the bread, given freely, heir of the first hands. You can rest now. We brought you the first of it,